And part of that college football betting guide is written by this man right here. You can find him on the Twitter machine at Kegs and Eggs. He is Adam Kramer. Adam, thanks for the time, my man.
Of course. Good to talk to you.
So let's kick things off here. And if you take a look at the betting odds, which, everybody starts to look at this time of year, Alabama plus 175 to win it all. Ohio State 3-1 to win it all. Georgia 4-1 to win it all. And then everybody else 10-1 or longer. Actually, Clemson 10-1, and then everyone else 25-1 or longer once we get past Clemson. Is the state of college football right now, specifically as we enter this season, is it as top heavy as the betting odds indicate?
Yeah, I think it is. Now, it's interesting when you say right now, because I do think you've got some teams like Texas A&M and even a team like Miami that's not as far along in the evolution and USC, right? You see some challengers in terms of, and when I say challengers, you see booster backing, right? We're talking about money in college football, and what then drives it, of course, is recruiting classes. But it's no secret at the top where you've got Alabama, who's constantly recruited under Nick Saban, Ohio State, which is recruited and developed incredibly well, and then, of course, Georgia, who's going to do this thing again. Now, of course, the thing about these odds, too, right, because I liked Cincinnati last year. I took a chance on them, I think, at 60-1 to win the national championship. And, yeah, they made the playoffs. But the problem is then you run into Alabama, right? So the thing sort of sorts itself out. And the reality is when you just look up and down the rosters, there's capable teams. I'm saying if they can figure out offensively, and really they're not much of a long shot, but when you go to that odds board, they certainly feel like it. When you're looking for another team to, down a bit for some value, it feels very top heavy, and it really does start with the quarterbacks, right? You've got a couple of really, really good quarterbacks going to be talked about to be the number one overall pick. You've got Will Anderson on Alabama, who I think is the best defensive player we've seen over the past 10 years. And yeah, well, we want to talk about value and we want to spice it up a little bit. For me, it really does start and stop in the obvious place, which is specifically those first two teams. Then Georgia, of course, they've lost, 15 draft picks. They're going to have to reboot a little bit, but that talent, that roster is loaded, and they've got a ton of options at quarterback. So, yeah, I would say this year right now, it does feel extremely top-heavy.
So, Adam, if I were to give you $100 American just out of my pocket, and I said you cannot bet on Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, or Clemson, but you could bet on anybody else to win the national championship, where would you put that free $100 American?
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you, by the way. I would probably go for a team like A&M. And, it's a team that I'm fascinated with. It's a team, frankly, we saw them beat Alabama last year. I don't want to call that a fluke, but A&M has found ways to lose games that they shouldn't. But if you're looking for the next Georgia, who I picked to win the national championship last year before the season began, that's not even a humble brag. I never get that right. So I have to enjoy that a little bit longer until I get it wrong again. That makes the most sense only because the roster is just loaded. And you look at the recruiting class that they're welcoming in now, elite quarterbacks, elite skill position talent, tons of beef up front. I know that the division is really, really tough, but in terms of just overall talent, that's a roster that I think in a year or two is going to resemble what you're seeing at Alabama if it's not there right now. The question is, can they develop fast enough and can they get more consistency on offense? Because I think that was the issue last year. Great defense, but again, top to bottom, there's about as much depth in that program right now as anybody in college football. It just may not be fully developed yet.
So we head over to the Heisman Trophy market. Everybody taking a look at that right now this time of year as well. C.J. Stroud, you just were talking about plus 225. Bryce Young, you were just talking about plus 350. Now, everybody, we do have a 7-1 in Caleb Williams, and everybody 20-1 or longer from there. Now, we have, at least in recent memory, seen a quarterback kind of come out of nowhere on a team that overachieved. Joe Burrow for LSU, projected, kind of late second round type guy who they have a magical season. He ends up winning the Heisman Trophy, kind of comes out of nowhere. You have Stroud and Young here. Are these the guys that it's like they're so good, the teams are going to be so good that it's tough to envision one of these other quarterbacks kind of coming out of nowhere to take that away from them?
No, yeah, for sure. It starts with them. You wonder what it's going to be from a voting standpoint for a guy like Young who's going to have to validate it and then do some more. And by the way, Will Anderson, we talked about Jahmyr Gibbs, their running back, who I like a lot as a potential dark horse, who was really good for Georgia Tech, is going to do a ton for them. But to me, Stroud, and I don't like just going with the chalk for a award that is so random at times, because college football random, but I think Stroud makes sense because even though he loses his favorite 2 targets, goodness, they're loaded at the position, right? We saw that in the Rose Bowl. My goodness, they just replenished immediately. Great running back, great offensive line, should be a better defense, all the ingredients, but that's not fun. So let's have some fun. The guy I really liked, and it's really no secret anymore, is Tyler Van Dyke out of Miami. Now, if you remember last year, it was about De'Aaron King. Mm-hmm. It was about trying to resurrect the U. He gets hurt really out of the gate, and they go to Van Dyke. They make a coaching change, and, is Manny Diaz going to stay or not? Along the way, they won 5 of their last 6 games, and Van Dyke really threw for 300 yards pretty much every time out. Offensively was a lot better, big physical guy. And when I'm looking at it, the recipe, of course, is yes, you have to play for the right program, and you have to win a lot of games. And the ACC, to me, is one of the most interesting pieces of college football because you have Clemson there for sure. Miami played pretty well. They've got to replace some talent, but I think Van Dyke is really, really good. Love the hire of Josh Gaddis from Michigan at offensive coordinator. I think that's going to be a huge help for him. I think Cristobal is going to settle things down there as well. The big question, of course, is can they win enough games? Situationally, I think Miami's in the right conference to do it, and I think Van Dyke is super talented. So you go down the odds board a little bit in that 30, 35 to 1 range. Haven't checked over the last few days where he is now. I think he fits the mold. I think he makes a lot of sense. But that's the interesting thing about this year. Quinn Ewers for Texas, right? If Texas is going to be good, people are going to want to do the whole Texas is back thing. I'm not doing that here, but he's a guy that has great wide receivers, and he plays the position to win. So as much as I want to see a defensive player win the award, as cool as it was to see a wide receiver win it, this is a quarterback award, right? So you got to find the right guy in the right situation, team, conference schedule that you think is out there. I think there's a lot of really good ones this year.
We are talking to Adam Kramer. You can find him on Twitter at Kegs and Eggs, one of the contributors to our awesome VSiN College Football Betting guide. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I love to see some of these numbers on these guys that we know are phenomenal players, but when you do have the 2 quarterbacks at the top that are so good and also play on such incredibly strong teams, and then like you mentioned a guy like Van Dyke, you mentioned some of these other quarterbacks as well, where maybe their team kind of overachieves. I want to make a case for a guy who, like a Will Anderson, who I think is probably like you said, like the best player we've seen on the defensive side in a decade, probably the best player in college football, no doubt about it. But will the voters actually do that? And I just don't have enough confidence in them to do it.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? Last year's a perfect microcosm of where we are. This looked like Stroud's award to win. You remember the Michigan State first half? He threw for 6 touchdowns and like 1 billion yards in 30 minutes, right? That felt like his award. Bryce Young is Superman against Georgia and really won that thing in the SEC championship game, but it took like an all-time effort against an all-time defense to do it. You look at the voting. You had Hutchinson in there for Michigan, who was a worthy finalist. Will Anderson down a little bit. So defensive players are getting into the conversation a little bit more, right? I think the voting is getting a little bit more progressive. There's like 800 people. There's way too many people that vote for the Heisman. I don't think they'll ever let me vote for this, but there is. The voting process is imperfect. Anderson, to me, I mean, statistically speaking, like led the nation in tackles for loss by like more than 10, led in sacks. It probably is going to do it again because you talk to people around Alabama. I talked to somebody there last week, and I was just saying, how's he look? And they're kind of laughing, like nobody can block him. It's a hard guy that they prepare for internally because they don't have anything to deal with that. So I think Will Anderson, because he did it last year, is going to take on new life potentially. Starting, 20 to 1 in that range, 20, 25 to 1. And for a defensive player, that's like unheard of preseason right now. But I'm with you. In the end, the comfort zone for too many voters is going to be quarterbacks, numbers, statistics. And you look at what Stroud did, and he wasn't even that comfortable through much of last year and put up huge statistical numbers. Very, very tough to overcome, but just selfishly, I want to see it because I think it'd be great for the sport. There are great players beyond the one position.
At Kegs and Eggs on the Twitter machine, again, a contributor to our awesome college football betting guide. You can find that at VSiN.com/subscribe. Adam Kramer, thanks for the time, my man.
Appreciate it, man. Talk soon.